Hey, welcome back, everyone. Trucker Rod and the S.E.E channel. And I set myself up with StreamYard. And I did get some lights. So I do have mics going to be coming. They were ordered in between the holidays, but they will be here. They probably are either there today or tomorrow. And let's see if we can get over to the chat because we are. Oh, I'm running blind on this, so bear with me. But how was everybody's holiday? And comments. There we are, right on. Mike's will be here Wednesday. Hey, and what do you know? Thanks for chiming in, Laura. I was just going to ask you that, but you did, so chat's there. And as our friends would say, the light is green, or the trap is clean and the light is green. We're good to go. Yeah, I threw in that subject. We're going to ease into this conversation a tad bit. But the first time around, I get that out of my light. The first time around in trucking for me was 88 through the beginning of January of 2001. And prior to that, I did diesel school, I did mechanics, and thinking I was going to be a diesel mechanic in the sense I wanted to work in heavy equipment like Caterpillar, John Deere construction, or agriculture. So I tried a few truck shops. As far as being a mechanic, I was light on experience. I was young. I want to say I was 20 years old, and but when I had turned 21 and I was still pounding at trying to get in as a mechanic, I went to even some big corporations. One of them in Grand Rapids, Michigan, was Steelcase, and I actually got an interview there on the floor. So they were looking for graduates from a different school than the one I came from. What this is leading up to is as I interviewed for a job for a mechanic, they said, we're fully staffed because back then we didn't have the internet. You either went to the unemployment office and or showed up in person and filled out a paper application there on site or at the unemployment office. Therefore, showed up, did the job interview, and they said, we're full. You're kind of light on experience, but any mechanic in the shop's like more helps the better. But as you know, they really run on thin lines with staffing a shop with mechanics. They said, you can drive a truck. I said, well, yes, because prior, as I was going through school and prior to going into school, I worked in rental and leasing, checking trucks in and out, washing them, changing oil, doing basic maintenance. But it was pressed on to me as, go get your master mechanics license and this and that. So I went to school, blah, blah, blah. And I still have it. I've had it for, how long have I had it now, Laura? 36 years. Going 37 now. This month will be March, will be 30, or this May will be 37. So they threw me in a truck, a Mack cab over with a KTA Cummins, and drove it up and down the road. They said, you're the first one that got it out of the yard. Long story short, they offered me a job that paid, the hourly pay was twice as much as the mechanic's pay, so I took it. Being I was going in the hole on bills and back then child support. Leading up, they did a lot of heavy haul and miscellaneous stuff, trash, the landfills and stuff like that with walk-in floor and push ram trailers. So did that until I just, back then was what I refer to as my outlaw days, which is we just worked. You worked till the job was done. Whether you got it done in 8 hours or 22 hours, you worked. There was none of this, regulations weren't there to regulate us in how many hours we were working, where we were driving. Logbooks were, yeah, DOT had a bug out their ass. They'd ask you for them, but I can tell you from 88 to 2000, from being over the road and being intrastate and in Michigan, just running, even though I had an interstate license, um, I couldn't tell you how to fill a logbook out correctly back then. It was, they basically showed you, but they would still press upon you basically to run. And, as it's been shown here on the internet, and I'm just going to open this up a little more. Said the chat would be over yonder. Where's the chat? Just put it back there. So going forward, things were done pretty well. Hence why in the early 2000s, the ELD was being really pressed harder on and stuff like that, because I worked for companies that just throw that shit out the door and run. And run was the name of the game back then if you were going to make money. Pay. Now, when I was a mechanic, like 1986 through 88, when I started, mileage, cents per mile, I think the starting, it was like 25 cents a mile. If you were doing good, if you're getting 25 cents a mile back then in the mid late 80s. I got paid by the hour, so for what I was doing, because basically we weren't doing overnights or anything like that. But it consisted of 48-foot walking floor trailers with 8 axles to Michigan gravel trains, end dumps, dual trailers. 5 on the pup, 3 on the lead, 3 on the tractor. And I was really jazzed up probably the first 6 years of that. And then probably by the late 90s, I was getting burned out, tired, and my body was getting beat up pretty bad. So what led me is I met this gentleman through then my ex-wife, and he was a chiropractor fresh out of school. And what was he, like 20, late 20s, 28, 29 years old. And dude was working like 35 hours a week, and he was clearing, and this is in the late 90s, clearing 120,000 a year is what he conveyed to me. And I want to say I'm working twice as many hours as him, if not more, and making half the pay. And something was wrong with that picture. So I got more inquisitive the more I saw him, because I was having, my back and neck was getting beat up pretty good. Those trucks back then were pretty darn rough. Like I said in earlier videos, the trucks were not mandated to have air conditioning until about, I think it was 1997. And if you could Google that, Laura, and see, but I want to say Class 8 trucks were mandated to have air conditioning by then, because we didn't have air conditioning. You basically, the boss just checked off a bare bone truck, threw you in it. All he did was just make sure the truck was heavy spec to do the hauling. That was it. Creature comforts and all that, you either had to be an owner operator, or you had to be in with a sweet deal company that would check off the boxes for nice seats, stereo. I mean, stereos were option back then. AM, FM cassette players was a option. CD players, CDs were out, but not in the semi trucks, because the anti-vibration, they didn't have them mastered yet, as they had done in the late 90s and the early 2000s. But leading up to it, I was getting, I was working my ass off. I mean, it became a program set to work every week, 70 to 90 hours a week. that was programmed in me for over a decade. Once the year 2000 come along, and this guy was really on me to take time off to go down and look at the school he graduated from, I was getting very, insightful to say, yeah, I need to look into this more. And I presented this to then the spouse, not my current one, and it was negated to say, we don't have time for this. And she wasn't going to give up the lifestyle of selling the house and uprooting and moving to the south. Georgia was, and we were in Michigan, but to go to Georgia to go to the nearest, for us, it was there or Davenport, Iowa. I was going to the one in Atlanta. Marietta, Georgia is where I went. But disagreements happened, things happened. We parted our ways, divorced, and I moved on. I sold my house, furnishings, everything I owned because I was burned out, tired, and hated trucking so bad. It just pissed me off. And this was by the fall of 2000. I was done with it, and I didn't want to see the inside of another semi truck. And I sold everything. My mechanics box. I had 15. Then was appraised at $15,000. Sold my mechanics tools box, all my hot rod parts, all everything and anything that wasn't bolted down. I liquidated everything in the house and garage. Sold my house. Split the stuff into paid off debts. Split the stuff in a divorce. Packed a little car I bought and moved to Georgia and proceeded to go to school. Working on my bachelor's. I was dual enrolled to do my bachelor's degree and attend the chiropractic school. And I was doing that. I was down there for, hell, I was halfway through the program when I had to drop out for family reasons. And, but I came back. I finished my bachelor's at Central Michigan University. I worked in healthcare from my junior year of college, right up till I got laid off in healthcare. And the last time was in 14. And I kept my CDL through those years. When I moved back for the family reason, my brother-in-law had told me, whatever you do, don't ever get rid of your CDL in case you ever have to put food on the table. And that was 14 years out of trucking that I got to be on the other side of the fence. But I had a gentleman today say, you worked in healthcare. And I said, yeah, because most of my customers know my background enough to say, what about this? He was having some back aches. He said, why would you get into trucking? I said, because with overtime, my best year with overtime, busting my ass, was like $60-some thousand a year. Even though I was on an RN wage scale, I can tell you that, and just being on that side of the fence for 10 years full time, between stress tests, cardiac rehab, and cardiac cath lab, pre and post op in the cath lab too, working in there, I can tell you that it doesn't pay like it should. Nurses are underpaid for what they have to do and the BS they got to put up with, whether you got a doctor that's not personable or a patient that's just insufferable, that you just want to get them in, get them out. And, they usually drag along their drama queen Karen family members that knows everything. I got a friend, or my mom was in nursing. They always got someone that's been in healthcare. So they are all of a sudden the know all be all experts, kind of like your YouTube university of, I know my rights. When people get pulled over and say, why am I being pulled over? I don't know. You swerved all over the road and you're blowing like a freaking 0.44. It's just that kind of scenario. But I learned a lot. I want to say the first half of my is like, well, I was being challenged, but then the last half of it and where it went south for me is the Obamacare, the National Health Care Act. Everyone thinks that we should have universal health care. I can tell you that if you got universal health care, it's kind of like saying you're pretty much going to have universal plain Jane this or that. You're not going to get top tier. You're going to get the entry level bare minimum, and it is insurance. The tier of insurance that you carry dictates the level of care you're going to get, unless you have deep pockets and want to pay over and above. Otherwise, they're kicking you out. And so, with that said, I kept my CDL, and I had my, I still have my mechanic's license. But the county I worked in, they knew me back in the mid '80s, and that when I was going to diesel school, I worked for them in the summers, fall, and spring, just getting the winter equipment put away, getting everything ready for summer, then putting the summer stuff away, prepping everything for winter. Then I'd get laid off. So I was usually 6 months in, 6 months out. But I ran heavy equipment and turned wrenches, and I did that on and off for 2 decades with them, and as part-time work, seasonal work. And when I got laid off from the hospital, then we sold our sports rehab, merged that in, because I also had a sports rehab clinic right after the Obamacare kicked in, because things were just looking south for healthcare with the lackluster of the bureaucracy getting in there. But then I got, laid off, because then it became a top down. We just came out of what they called the GFC, the Great Financial or Global Financial Crisis. So therefore, consulting firm came in. I was second wave. I got laid off. So sold the sports rehab, merged in with this gentleman that bought it, worked for him for 10 months, and then he cut me loose. Just couldn't afford the wages because he was still on the startup side. I looked at my wife, said, I've got to go back into skilled trades. And it was either turning wrenches and or driving truck. I met a gentleman that I was working on treating in my sports rehab, and he was in a company, and he said, try applying for them. If you have a CDL, they'll, train you on the product they do to deliver and pick up and all that. And I tried that, and that didn't work. Or actually, nothing was hiring at the time, for to say the least. So I put in a slew of applications, and this company was one of the top. What was it, Laura? These guys probably were in the top 3, top 6 that I applied for, and it was like Indeed back then, because these guys don't hire off Indeed. They don't use Indeed anymore. I and one other guy that got hired in were the last 2 to get hired in under Indeed. They use staffing now, but I got hired in after I had taken bombardments of phone calls, but people found out I was out of driving for 14 years. Snyder, JB Hunt, all the big players said, go back to school and get a refresher, because they weren't going to deal with me. These guys called me up, said I'd been out for a while, so you're a little rusty. They said, yeah. And it was now my friend Josh. He brought me in because he was a warehouse manager then, and brought me in, and we talked. I turned the interview around to ask them questions, because I didn't want to be, I didn't know what the industry had done in those 14 years I'd been out, but it definitely had flipped the script, and it became better. Regulation wise, to where I'm not running like an outlaw again. But they hired me. These guys hired me. Everyone else denied me, and I was shaky. Definitely the week he rode with me, he goes, "You're white knuckling that," and I said, "Man, I haven't been behind the wheel of a truck in 14 years." I said, "This is a different feeling." But yeah, I shook the rust off. Took me probably a good year or two, and I was getting, each passing year, I got more comfortable and very confident now, but never be overconfident because that's when you start making mistakes. Always keep your fundamentals sharpened and using every day. But now, and that was 12 years, 12 plus years I was in the first time in the healthcare. Now I'm back in the driving. I'm just giving you some content as I'm leading up to this. The first time I got out of driving, I was burned out. I got worked to death. And I never, and even when I was home for the weekend, I was sleeping all the time. I was ornery. I never ate right. I'd leave driving during the night, and by the end of the week, I was driving during the day and sleeping at night because you didn't know which way was up with your sleep schedule. That you're not, and you're stressed all the time trying to get somewhere because they're pushing on you all the time, and it just added more and more. That was one of the reasons why I got divorced too. Is just I became an ugly person then. So when I got back into this, when I got back into driving, everyone around my wife, everyone that knew me back then said, "This is not good." He was a SOB to be around when he drove, and he was mean. And I don't know, Laura, you're in the chat. You can chime in. If any of you guys want to chime in, please say hi, or where you from and all that. I'm 11 years in, going on 12 this September, and I was way more stressed coming home, where I nearly broke a vessel having a stroke, with the drama, the BS, the bureaucracy, and what I call the clipboard people from administration coming around telling us how to do our jobs when you're trying to provide patient care in healthcare drove me bananas. And to be these last 11 years in solitude in your own truck, and this company doesn't bother me. They just say, "Hey, I would rather have you come in a day later, be late for a customer, than to hear that you're in an accident, have to get a wrecker, or you got a ticket." Those kind of scenarios. They just take your time. You're paid by the hour. There's no reason to speed, which I don't. And been very, very blessed. And we were talking about this. This is what led me to this discussion tonight. Is I told my wife, I said, how I could throw spaghetti at the wall of all the trucking companies in this nation, and I found one that stuck 11 years ago. Now, granted, I didn't know much of the insight because, like I said, the way we operate and mirror the pay and everything is like Walmart in the sense, and that's a good job too. Um, but yeah, and at some point, now that I'm 59, looking at 60 this year, you got to wonder, how long will your health hold up? I'm questioning things because of my age, and I give a lot of time out here on the road that, I'm like, at some point, you know, trucking's not going to be forever for me. And I want to continue to do other things using my mind because of my education and all the other things that I have implemented with our businesses and that in investing. So I was working on that with my time off, and we've gotten quite a bit of traction over the holidays with that stuff, where our real estate business is going to be taking off later this year. And I got the company to handle all the logistics of the moving the money to and from and all that, and then for the investing is put in place. I worked on my investments, personal investments, and made some tweaks there going for 2026. I called an outside source to consult with some of the decisions I was making. I made a couple adjustments per their recommendations, but other than that, I looked at some long term stuff and some global, international stocks. I bought out of the 100%, I only put 20% of that into the international global stocks. The other 80% is more like the S&P, the T row, and some other ones. So I kind of mix things around a little bit. But that's things you need to do. You need to look at where you're at and where you're going, and at what point in time do you hang it up. I know the old timers back in the 70s and 80s, because I was old enough to recollect and be aware. But there's guys they got in the truck when they were 16, 18 years old, and they just never got out. Or they grew up on the farm and drove grain trucks or what have you, or around us with sugar beets, corn, soys, navy beans, in the farming, because I worked farming for a couple of years. What I can say is, they came by way of that, or like me, they just by chance happened into it, and that's all they kind of stuck to know. Um, by the end of the year 2000, I was bored and wanted to be challenged more, and I could say that right now, but I don't want to say I want to be challenged more here in the driving, but I've taken on those businesses to learn more, swing trading, with my trade view, starting trade station for longer hold. I've got investments going all around besides cash flow on the side, besides the paycheck coming in here. So, that all said, there's going to be a line in the sand at some future point. I want to dabble more into that. I want to transition myself to a place to where I can sunset myself. Um, in Michigan, my wife and I grew up around a lot of people. They worked GM or Dow Chemical was the two big corporations by us. General Motors, Bay City, Saginaw, Flint, and Dow Chemical was actually a mile away from both of our houses. Dow Chemical is on one side of Saginaw Road, and Dow Corning was on the other. So both manufacturing plants and all that. And then the world headquarters one was out by Freeland, and the other one was right down the road from us. But they would work their 30 years, get their pensions from the unions. And, you would always hear those guys, or they would have a county job, city job that would provide a government, insurance and pension and all that. But they would always, when I retire, I'm going to go south for the winter. That's what they'd always say. Everyone always went to Florida from Michigan to Florida. I had some old boys would go to Texas. One went to Arizona. With that said, they would do that, say, for a decade, if they were lucky, 5 years. My father-in-law and mother-in-law got to do it for nearly 15 years till his health went down, and that's just it. There's the key point. You get to a point when your health takes you out of the game to be able to fulfill what you wanted to do in life after work. And I've had an ex-father-in-law who retired from Dow Chemical in 2004. He had his 30 years in. He had 31, 32 years in. He retired at 51 years old. Went into Dow, I think, at 18, 19 years old. And he was 55 when he died from aneurysm on his aorta coming off his heart. Dropped dead in his kitchen. 55 years old in that. And I've run across so many people that they get. General Motors seems to be the one that, back in the day, those guys were lucky if they got 5 years out of retirement and they dropped dead. And to me, it was like, why would I want to do that? And the wife and I said, if our health takes us out and we can't get back to a nice warm state during the winter, now we're stuck in bad health and staring out the window during, from November to Easter. You're staring out in the white tundra in the cold temps, and your only excitement is either going to the grocery store or going to a doctor's appointment. So we elected, both of us agreed, let's just uproot and move to what we want to go is Arizona. She's been to Florida with her folks many times. She has spent 2 weeks because she spent nearly 20 years in Seattle. She'd fly there in the winter just to get away and hang out, whether 2 weeks or a month. And the humidity would knock her out, where she'd be in the ER throwing up, and that the pressure, the barometric pressure, would just give her a migraine that would just make her deathly sick, violently throwing up. So she said, let's not look at Florida. So we dug in, and actually, back in '88, when I started Heavy Haul, the guy that mentored and kind of just groomed me, and he's the guy you looked up to be the smooth operator, and that he's living there in Arizona. He got on me to say, hey, you should come out and check this out. And we did in October of 2021. We flew out, spent 8 days, fell in love with the area, the weather, from Mesa, Apache Junction, out to Gold Canyon, and the whole Santan Valley area. Then we took one full day up to Sedona and went up to Bell Rock, the chapel, had a nice steak dinner out on the deck, out on the sidewalk of one of the nice steakhouses there. But my wife said this would be awesome, and it would benefit her health, being she has medical issues. So we took the last 4 years and just hunkered down and started just throwing everything in the kitchen sink and paying off, what debt we had standing, plus building up capital. And then it just happened to fall in our lap this last summer to sell our other property with a buyer that just fell in love with it. And I couldn't pass up, like, if someone's emotional on something you own, sell it. Sell it. Other than your wife or kids, if it's not bolted down, just sell it. You can always get another house. You can always get other things, they're just things. So we did, and that kind of made us look at each other and say, this is changing the trajectory of us ever moving to Arizona. And so we got on it since October, and Friday was some good calls. I consulted with the one company, IRA Financials, handling everything for the self-directed and, of course, all our real estate ventures. I had a morning consultation with them. Then I had the consultation with our loan officer, who is a friend of ours out there in Phoenix, and some of the resorts we were looking at, and that's where you own the property under the home. My wife said, I don't want to have to sell this place and then be in limbo, and our place in Michigan, and then try to find a place out there. So we had paid off enough that we are that close to having the capital, about 3 more months. And so we got approved to buy a house out there at a cap. She was surprised for what we have. We could take more of a loan out. And I said, no, I want to be right at such and such, which was more than half of what I was approved for. I said, I don't want to be house pouring over leverage, but just a quaint little place that we can manage, because I've had to help take care of my wife when her medical got to its worst. So I look back and say, when she was at her worst with her medical and in a wheelchair, I said, I need a place that is easily that I can get her around in. It's, wheelchair friendly, this and that, and gated community, barn grill, 9-hole golf course, activity center, workout center, pickleball, tennis courts, you name it. And you'd say, oh, well, the HOA is going to get you. No, my HOA there per year because you own the land under the home. It's not one of those you have the, one of these 55 and over resorts like Florida and Arizona where you got to have a land lease under it. It's not this one. There was only 3 communities out there. We looked at all 3. This one was at the bottom, ended up being our best because they're more of our kind of people and not so much uppity, stuck up Poindexters, to say the least. So we're going to be moving forward, and I just want to buy a second home now there, and then once that's established, then we will start. We are going to be liquidating stuff in the house, and eventually, probably in the next year and a half or so, we're going to be transitioned. I'll be, everything's happening. The match was struck, fuse was lit, everything's now happening. And then and then I made the investment adjustments in the afternoon, and I told the wife, I said, where I positioned our investments is taking it up on a return of 7x. So I, was pretty busy on Friday. I kind of was doing the happy dance Saturday morning. So we're doing well. You got to stick to a plan. But the one thing I've gotten from other people in the industry is this: trucking, a job like this where you're sacrificing time away from home. But the key thing all these drivers out here sacrifice is you're beating up your body physically and you don't sleep right. And unless you got, like, this guy just parked next to me. I'm here in Louisa, Kentucky, at the Valero on US 23. Local guy, he parks his, because he put his vehicle in where he parks his dump truck in one of the truck spots here. And there's always openings. There's always a place to park here. But it's not the uppity up, but their pizza pockets here are they're homemade from scratch. And I hope they'll have one left when I go in here. But he parked his dump truck, whether he's doing end dump for gravel and sand or if he's a coal hauler, because coal hauling's still strong here in Eastern Kentucky. And therefore, if you can land a job like that, maybe work 10, 12 hours a day and be done. I used to do that, but, regulations are better now than they were then. But to do even regional work over the road, or a local driving job where you're in the trailer using a pallet jack and all that, just remember, you got the heat, the summer, for us anyways, the humidity and the heat, because Michigan gets humidity as like Florida, granted the Great Lakes around us, and then the sub-zero cold, the below zero, the wind chill, the snow, the ice. You're tackling all that and traffic and trying to make your deliveries. Whether you're, say you're running for S.E.E or Estes or R&L, your LTL stuff, or like me doing regional where you're covering anywhere from 3 to 5 states in a week's time. So you get home, you sit down, you decompress out of the truck. It takes me a half a day just to tone it down, to get my heart rate, down. I don't have any diabetes, don't have blood pressure issues or any of those issues, but I've just learned to come home and decompress, whether I sit in the garage for an hour or I go in the house, sit down at the island there in our kitchen. We have a bar there, and the wife will come out and talk to me and all that jazz. Or like last week, I got home Wednesday, and there you go, you got 5-6 inches of snow, and you got to go out and dig the driveway out before you can get the car in the garage or up in the driveway. And it's just that kind of shit. You come home and either you're pushing a lawnmower around for the 2 days you're home. If you're like a regional over the road driver, you come home and you got chores to do, or if you positioned where you're paying for landscape to be done and in your snow, or maybe you got kids. We're empty nesters. We're not obligated to anything. My kids are 39 and going to be 29. So we just looked around and said, why try to do the traditional thing? Let's just move to where we want to spend our remaining days. That way I can sit on my porch on Sundays instead of being in the truck here. And I can just look up and down the street at palm trees, maybe look at the Superstition Mountains, watch a sunset, watch a sunrise, whatever it is. Have a stogie, maybe go out and do, some desert riding in a side by side, whatever I may want to do. But the thing of it is when we make that transition out there, all we're going to have is a mortgage that I told the lending officer, I said, literally, I could sell this house and take the equity, and then what we have already saved up, the wife could plop out there. I could stay here and work. I could pay that house off in 2 years. And the wife took me aside after that meeting, the first meeting with our lending officer, and she goes, I don't want that. She goes, I don't want to be out there by myself. It's one thing to be home knowing you're coming home, at the end of the week, but at the end of the week, you're not coming home. I may not see you for 3 months. I told her I'd fly out maybe once a quarter till we got the house paid off. She goes, no. So that got wiped off the books. But the lending officer pulled some, I knew she's good, and she made it work. So she's making the numbers work for us so we can tuck this house in on our current budget. And then we can sell this place and all the contents in it to put in a high yield savings, and that's going to be our little nest egg or cushion as we transition. I'm going to take a job out there probably to get started until our businesses are better cash flowing. They're flowing, but they're kind of breaking even to save, but not enough to cover mortgage and utilities, because all we're going to have is the mortgage, insurance, taxes, and an HOA fee, which still the tax, what did you say, Laura? The taxes were going to be, they're dirt cheap, $200, $300 per year, and then the HOA fee. So we're going to be, what we're paying right now where I'm in a semi-retirement community. We pay for we lease the land under our home. With that, just taking away the mortgage, but the lot rent, and we have to pay taxes and insurance, we will pay 60% less out there because we're going to have a smaller place, and everything's going to be 50% less. So we ran the numbers over and over and over and said, this is all we need to clear, which even our lending officer said, geez, you guys don't really need, you could pretty much wake up and just go on idle all day, 40-hour week work week, and cover all your bills. We're going to go out there with no debt other than the mortgage. That's it. And then living expenses. So we will have from 20, and like I said, giving you a backstory, the content, we got dug in with my student loans and her medical debt and everything else going on. And once we took this house on with its mortgage, it pushed us close to $300,000 in debt. For a lot of people, that's probably not a big deal. For us, she wasn't working. So we paid off a good portion of it by 2018. From 2018 to now, we paid over $200,000 of debt off. So as we're winding down, I said, I really am getting tired of the winters. So we got to start sunsetting ourselves from Michigan and looking at Arizona at some point in the future. So we lit the fuse Friday, and things are going to start snowballing and going through this year, and then we'll assess it from at this time next year. So should you stay in trucking? I say no. A lot of guys would say you'd have to be, a fool, having a secure job and this and that. But, I'd say put in your 5 or 10 years. I'd say that'd be the most you'd want to do, and either transition into like what a lot of guys did back in the 90s is what they would tell me out on the road, because we talk a lot on the CV then. You didn't have all the fancy dancy cell phones, but or YouTube. So what a lot of guys did is um, they would work, run their ass off, whether they owned their own truck, their wife was like had a professional job, whether they were, say they were a nurse. What he'd do is come out and he'd drive for 5 years, pay off the house, sell the truck and everything, and go home and take a dock job, working in a loading dock, warehouse job or manufacturing job, to where then all they had to do was just sustain themselves, with maybe just buying a one new vehicle and having a used vehicle, and not have all that overhead, where now these people are buying, a basic starter homes anywhere from 450 to 750 bucks or $1,000 to get into a house that is so freaking large. All the new houses around us are like 3 stories, 3-car garages, $500,000 to $700,000. Diesel pickup in the driveway. Mama's driving a Lexus or something nice. And I'm just like, someone's one health issue away from losing a lot of that shit because they're leveraged up on both incomes. And what I told my wife is, traditionally back in the day when I grew up as a young lad, is you mortgaged your house, you lived on one income. So if both your mom and dad worked, you only financed on one income, your house, your cars, all that. The other one went into savings and retirement. So that's how we kind of taken a more traditional route of being producer savers, as they say. We work and we save. We don't spend unless it's just necessities or current debts. But I'm getting to where the old boys would say, yeah, once this is paid off, I'm selling the truck. I'll put that in the bank, or they'll buy themselves a new pickup, and then, hey, I'll just take a local job. And that's all I need to do out there. I've already looked around and said, all right, I've already got 2 options out there. So I said, no worries there. I'm not driving, because that's my lending officer. Well, why don't you take a driving job here? And my wife and I were just laughing. She goes, they'll become hell or high water. When he leaves this company, he's not driving anymore. She goes, no effing way. And I want him home every night at the dinner table, sleeping in that bed, not out on the road. And he don't need to be out dealing with traffic and all the wishy-washy hobbabaloo of people that are getting crazier and stupider by the day out here driving. So that'd probably be my only complaint out here right now. Not with this company, but with the world and driving truck, is traffic. Traffic is my number one issue. People are way more heads up their ass than they were then, because they didn't have infotainment centers, cup holders, cell phones, and all that. People just threw their left leg up on the dash and they drove their cars. They listened to tunes, and that was it. But I don't know. That's just my upbringing. I like, when I go out for a drive, my wife and I did that when we were in Arizona. We went on that cruise. We went on a nice cruise. She recorded, what did you record, Laura? About 45 minutes worth of video as we drove up as the sun rose from we came out of Mesa and went up through Scottsdale and all that, but went up to Sedona. She videoed a lot of that road trip. We went up and climbed Bell Rock and then to the chapel, and then went and ate and cruised around town. But it was just a nice cruising day. And people just don't know what it's like to go out for a cruise or a Sunday drive, what that entails, But I don't know. Go watch TikTok if you want to see volatile women and volatile relationships and marriages. That's the place to look at volatility and what not to do to be in a marriage. So, yeah, trucking will. The 2 things I seen guys come and go is this industry tears your health up. And I know a couple guys that I work with here I can tell you that it's taken a toll on their bodies health wise. Dietary is horrible. I do the best job I can. I have cut so much out already in the last 3 months, and gotten off the energy drinks, and I definitely made up for that cleansing that out. Christmas and New Year's, I slept a lot during Christmas week when I was home. But I've really cut down. I want to say I've cut 3/4 of my caffeine out my daily consumption, just down to a cup of coffee a day, and that's it. And then I do a Celsius, which has got vitamins in that. It's caffeine free, so I put that actually right here. Um, so I fill this. This takes a bottle and a half, so about 22, 24 ounces. It's not really labeled to say, but it's stainless steel. And then I put a pack of Celsius in this, just to get some vitamins and all that. So my water, switching my water bottles over. I'm buying bottle water in glass bottles. I cut out any sweets and sugar stuff now. This last couple, I don't want to say last month, but the last couple months, I've just been taking a vice, cutting it out, get through that one, cut another one out, cut another one out. The first one was bread. I don't have no bread in this truck. Second was the energy drinks, and then now it's the sweets and refined sugar stuff. So dietary will beat you up because you're working some ungodly hours under a lot of stress, and that's the thing is you don't get good circadian of sleep. That either if you got a local job and you're at home, you're not getting a good night's sleep because you're getting up. For me, it's like Sundays. I get up at 3. I'm in the truck at 4. On this route, my next day's stop dictates if I'm getting up at 2 or 3 in the morning, because I've got to stop on Monday mornings out in Maryland. They start functioning and working at between 4:30 and 5 a.m. They want their deliveries done so they can get their house trucks loaded up and going at 6 a.m. So that means if I'm 2 hours away, guess what that means? If I got to be there between 4:30 and 5, it means I got to start early the day before to get my 10-hour break, and then maybe get up at 1 or 2 in the morning and then hammer away to get over there. So it's one of those scenarios that you're the stops for me dictate if I'm sleeping in longer or if I'm getting up earlier. But you don't get good sleep. So you don't get good sleep. You don't get good dietary. Your physical health it takes a toll on your physical health, and you wonder why truck drivers are overweight, high blood pressure, diabetes, and a lot of them have clotting issues because of being seated like this and your knees bent. Like, there's been problems where guys have had poor circulation in their lower legs because they don't get on walk enough to get the limbs going and the fluids pumping through. So, yeah, I'd say while I still got my health, you got to know when to say when. And that's up to each individual. But just remember, if you don't build structure a strategy to exit yourself out of trucking, that could be the end result. And granted, on the emotional and mental side is your time, the more time you're away from home, the more toll it takes on those loved ones at home. My kids, not so much. My kids have had to deal with a lot of the early days as my daughter was 18 months old, and I was in the middle of my driving when my son was born. But it took the toll on them. They hate that I'm out here doing this, but they would be more than happy to see me out of it because they saw it destroy me and destroy a marriage. And that's what I'm getting at is you will destroy your relationships, whether it's your immediate family, your wife, your kids. You will see how it will destroy families. So you really gotta weigh all that in, and you gotta say, if you and your spouse are on board and playing as team go get at it, like my wife and I did. But if I hadn't put something in place this last couple years, I think she'd start questioning the integrity of me being out here like this. But we built something to say we can at least have an exit strategy and be able to sunset this career and go into normalcy, to say the least. And just a lot of guys don't have that, and it is hard to be, if you're out here for a whole week, or for a lot of companies, they require, if be out 2 to 4 weeks. If you look at a lot of these companies, whether regional or over the road, and they will run the living snot out of you. If you don't, you're not going to make money. And that was the whole name of the game then, and it still is now. You've got to hustle, you got to run. You can't just drive 12 hours one day and think you're going to sleep 12, 15 hours, and then get up the next day because you're so tired. Dude, you're just going to be tired all week, and then you're going to go home, bounce the kids on your lap, spend time with mama and all that, and you probably have a 34-hour restart or a couple days at home. Then you're back at doing the same shit again, and it just, after a decade, it wears on you to where you start getting a little goofy and saying, what the fuck am I doing? And you really do gotta start thinking about a plan. And luckily for us, we started working on it years ago. And I want to say before the pandemic hit, but we definitely got it going on now. So it's just sticking with it. Don't deviate from the plan, and we'll be there. And then I'm going to have a time and day where I've been laying out a format of how this YouTube channel is going to go, and it's going to have more daily stuff going on, because I'll be able to work from the studio in such a way that I can dedicate more personal time to not only our businesses, but for each other. And that's my key thing right now, is my health and my relationship with my wife to stay sustaining farther down the road. So I appreciate y'all being here. You have to sit down and have that mental negotiation for yourself, if it's the right, how long you're going to be in it, and if both you and your wife are going to be working together to either pay off debts or build up a savings that can help you. Maybe you're using the money to build up a capital to buy a house, and or, like I said, paying off debt. But then you gotta transition into something else, because you got to give each other respect and time, because that's what you get married for, to spend that time with that person. Because hey man, they're pretty cool to hang out with. I like to do this forever. Don't just give up because your job is just superseded and burnt you out to where now you can't see which way's up. So just respect yourself and respect the others around that love you, and understand that it's not a forever job. This is definitely not a forever job. um, Linebackers in the NFL, what are they, a 5-year lifespan, give or take a couple years. Ray Lewis is the exception of being a middle linebacker in 17 years in a something. You're going out and just crashing your body every play that you're out on the field. And it's like that out here driving truck. You're beating yourself up, and before you know it, 20 years goes by, and you're like, what the fuck? And I've already got my second time around. I've gotten another, pushing 12 years first time, going on 12 years second time. But you can get your time back. That's the one thing we all fight and will never see, is time. Time is against us. So look at what you want to do with your life to fulfill some things in your bucket list, but also give back to your wife and kids. And because you won't get that time when those kids are grown and gone. You're not getting that time back. So time's against you. So respect it and cherish it every day, and take good care of yourself. Be diligent. What you put in your body, getting exercise and getting good adequate sleep. So that's the only tips I can give y'all. And like I said, I respect this industry. It has, this time around, I've used it as a tool to elevate us, to get us out of debt and position us better. And I'm very blessed and thankful for that. So until next time, folks, stay safe, continue educating yourself. Knowledge is learned and not taught. And we will see you all in the next video.